You're listening to Barbell Logic,
the podcast where we talk about what it means to experience strength
and how you can use simple, hard, and effective strategies in training and nutrition to improve your life.
It starts with meeting you where you are right now and finding lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show.
Hello, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to the best podcast in the world. Yes, I said it. I'm your host, Niki Sims. With me is the best other host in the world, Andrew Jackson.
Hello. Let's go.
Let's do this. It's Tuesday. It's time to talk about things that impact our every single day. And that's food. I love food. So interesting couple questions from, I think, clients have been coming up this season, spring into summer. I've had some interesting nutrition questions arise and more questions about conditioning, which to me, like the underlining factor is I want to look different. How can I have less body fat? And you and I, like we have talked about before, know that nutrition, body composition changes triggered by nutrition and strength training take some time. And it's not like an overnight thing. And it's hard. So how do we know if we're doing the right thing with nutrition? How do we know if we're on the right track with nutrition?
I just had a client tell me this week during one of our monthly nutrition call check-ins, he's also my strength client, and we have at least the illusion of progress almost every session.
With strength?
On the strength side, where you're adding a little bit of weight or you're doing some other measurable increase in stress that gives you some sort of feedback mechanism that you're doing the right thing. And he asked me, well, what are some metrics? We track weight and waist on a weekly basis, but that doesn't always change, and it doesn't always change in one direction. And any change that does happen is occurring over a long period of time. And that was actually exactly his question that he posed to me, which is, well, is there something else that we can track? And that's a tough one to answer because weight and waist are going to go up and down and left and right, day to day, week to week. And you can, just like with strength, measure progress over a long arc of time, but it's a little bit harder to do day to day or week to week.
It is. I mean, it was just happening to me this last week where I start to change my behavior because I want to see changes in my body. And I'm frustrated 3 days later when I see no impact of those changes. And you always want it to be sooner. I know it just takes more time, but you make changes that feel like trade-offs and feel like you should get something that you want right away, but it doesn't happen like that. There are some things that I think have a little more instant payoff or noticeable payoff, things like sleep and stuff like that. But yeah, I can see why he would want some sort of like acknowledgement of his work and acknowledgement of his efforts.
Because it's motivating.
Yeah.
That's the really thing that he notices on the strength side. It's like, well, if when I show up every day, then I get to, at the end of the week, see the line on the graph going up from history and look back a couple, 2-3 sessions, and I notice that I'm lifting more, and I don't really get that while I'm having to make more choices that feel not normal yet. They feel like I'm having to often avoid eating at least a certain amount of things that I previously was more normal parts of my life, or I'm needing to add things that require me to be more intentional about having more protein, more lean protein, or adding more vegetables that just weren't part of my routine.
Yeah, like most people don't decide, I can't wait to eat broccoli today.
Exactly.
It's not a normal behavior for most people.
True story, though. Earlier this week, I was cleaning out the refrigerator and had an entire head of broccoli sitting in the vegetable drawer. And I was trying to think of something to do. And Clara, my daughter, just had gotten home from school. And she's like, Dad, wait, don't do anything with that. I want to eat it all right now. And she set up her iPad on the kitchen table and started what do you call the capture? Time lapse? Yeah. She set up the time lapse recording and proceeded to eat the entire head of broccoli in one sitting.
Oh my
and Lord. Got down to the last floret of broccoli and was like, I don't think I can eat it. I don't want to throw up. Please eat this for me. So I ate one floret out of an entire head of broccoli. So some people do, apparently.
Man, I hope the rest of the house was okay that night.
Well, I kept checking in with her the rest of that night, and then she's like, well, totally fine. I'm good. So she is not broccoli intolerant.
Amazing.
Some on this podcast are.
Some people in this podcast are.
So if a client were to ask you that question, how would you respond? I know what I said back to
Which question?
How do I know? What do I track? How do I know whether this is working or not beyond the weight and waste over the longer period of time? But is there anything that you advise your clients to pay attention to day to day or week to week?
One thing I always like to hear about is how are you feeling when you're training? Because I'm working with people who are trying to get stronger, and even people who are trying to make body composition changes. They want to preserve their muscle, which means they need to be able to keep training, and it's on me to adjust their training based on how intense the caloric deficit is, or adjust the rate at which we're doing a caloric deficit to make sure they still feel like they can train. I like to know how they're feeling during training.
What does that sound like from the client's perspective when it's
I have enough energy. I would like to do more things in a session. I hear that too, is like, I would train more if I could. Or it might be, everything feels heavier than it should. That's one where it's like, okay, let's figure out where you're getting your food from, or maybe we actually need to give you some more calories, or we need to adjust training. So it's either like, yes, everything's great, energy is awesome, or it's like everything feels hard and heavy and I can't seem to get through a session. That's a really good indicator, because your food it's energy in the moment, but it's also energy for your recovery. And we need both of those for training. And that has a lot to do with how much you're eating and then the types of food that you're eating. So I think that's a really important metric that is completely subjective, but that's what it comes down to.
Do you think that you can be in a deficit and still feel like you have enough energy for training?
I think if you get the training dialed in, which gets more and more sensitive. So yeah, I do think it's hard to feel energized in training when you're in a deficit, but maybe you're in too much of a deficit and you don't need to be in as much of a deficit that you're actually in, and you can add a little bit more calories back in. And I'm talking like, sometimes 100 calories is enough to feel better when you're training. Right. Or you can redistribute your calories throughout the week so that you have more calories on the day that you're training. So that becomes a more and more sensitive balancing act when you're really in a deficit and you're trying to keep your training intact. But you do need to manage your expectations around training for sure when you're trying to do like a more intense deficit.
I would agree also that we're not usually working with people that are about to get up on stage, and that want cellophane skin and, less than 5% body fat for 30 minutes of, performance. Normal people living normal lives that want to get stronger and recomposition. There is no reason that you need to push your caloric deficit so hard that you feel terrible all the time.
Yeah. And if you're not feeling good in training, how are you feeling when you're trying to work, when you're trying to like deal with kids, when you're trying to like even just drive home from work? Like that all becomes really important. So energy to train, that's why I think that's a really big thing, because if you're not feeling good training, it's not sustainable. We want to keep training. And if you don't feel good training, we can't get you the energy for it.
Totally agree.
What's another one?
The one that I notice a lot, I'll call it the seatbelt test. But I think it could be applied to other fit feedback mechanisms. I have one client who calls it the pants test. When he sits down in a pair of pants, there's a certain feeling that's a signal that things are a little fluffier than he would prefer.
More of me than usual.
I feel that when I put the seatbelt on in my car. There's just a certain point at which it tips over into, this is not comfortable. So call it a fit test, maybe more broadly, more generically, that I like to ask people, how are clothes fitting? How are seatbelts fitting? How are pants fitting?
Yeah.
Subjective measures of how good you feel in your skin.
Yeah.
Which can be hard when, somebody's trying to lose a lot of weight. You might not quite know what that is yet.
Yeah.
But even I've noticed even when I was on the way down from 285, I could tell when things were going the other direction. The fit would change, and so even when I was at 265, I kind of knew when I was starting to move back up to 270. There's something that changes when you're losing body fat versus gaining. Just kind of the way your clothes fit.
Yeah.
So that's what I would ask is like, what are you noticing throughout the day? A lot of what I ask is about awareness. How do you feel in your clothes? But it could also just be like, are you feeling full all the time?
Ooh, good one.
That's probably one that I've noticed personally, and also with a lot of clients that, especially guys that are a little bit heavier than they want to be, have developed over time. And often, and especially if somebody's been lifting, they went through a phase of eating a lot. And, you get to a point where you start to feel like it's normal to have that immense pressure of fullness and almost wait until you feel that before you stop eating. Whereas I think somebody who's dialed in their nutrition more often than not has a satiated feeling without that fullness feeling. And if it's your macros approach or some sort of highly regimented weighing and measuring, whether it's zone or if it fits your macros or even just macro counting in general, where they are no longer guiding their food choices based on how they feel, they're just following some sort of regimen. It's a pretty big learning curve, I think, to start noticing and having that kind of awareness, whether it's to fit, check, or you're just how your body feels. That I think can be a huge awakening to actually pay attention to those things.
Yeah. And that's helpful. Now that you say that, that's why you want to always ask how you're feeling while you're utilizing those tools. Like,
yes.
So now that you're tracking your macros, pay attention and start to learn what it feels like, what you have to do to get 150 grams of protein a day. Like, what does that plate look like and how do you feel when you're doing it? Because that way, when you don't want to track macros, you still know what you have to do to get enough of that in your diet.
Right. I think of them as almost like training wheels, those really structured diets. They're very effective on their own, and they can be very powerful when coupled with paying attention to how you feel and noticing what that's like, so that eventually you can take those off and still continue to make choices that reinforce those things, how it feels day to day.
When you were on those really structured diets before, like tracking macros, did you have times when you were just like, I am so tired of this. Like, can I please just eat what I want when I want?
Of course. And it had a really negative effect on that progress, because for years I would drive my weight down. Usually about 250 would be when I would start to just get irritated with it. And then, or maybe 245. And then I would bounce back up to 260 when I stopped weighing and measuring, or if I was traveling to a point where I couldn't weigh and measure, and I would just go back to baseline habits, which when you're at a certain weight, that weight is maintained by a certain set of habits and behaviors.
Right.
And you can change that number by going on a structured diet, because it forces you to change your behaviors and habits. But then if you take the tool away and you haven't reflected enough on, or have enough awareness on what behaviors you were actually doing, then you just fall back into whatever that previous baseline was, and the weight goes right back up to it.
Yeah.
So the real skill and change in my mind is learning how to make sustainable behavior changes.
Yeah.
What that feels like.
That's always been, we had a conversation a while ago about like levels of, like we were trying to compare levels of advancement in like nutritioning. So like in strength, we would say novice, intermediate, advanced. And my thought around someone who is advanced with their nutrition is that they know which tools to use so that they have the power to make the changes that they know will work. That's the thing, is like, you have to trust what you're doing, or else even when you're frustrated, you're going to be like, I'm too frustrated. This is not worth it. So knowing the tools that you can rely on to make the changes, and that allows you to be, this is the second important component, is at peace with your choices. And when you don't like your choices, you know exactly what different ones to make sure that you're back to where you want to be. I think that's like advanced nutrition. Beginner nutrition is like trying those tools, developing the skills, learning what it feels like, figuring out what they need to eat more of, what they need to eat less of. knowing what feels good. Like you talked about the seatbelt test, like you know when it feels wrong, which means you have to know when it feels the way you want it to feel. You have to figure out what that is for yourself to know how to get back there.
Yeah, I like that analogy. I would flesh that out with the intermediate phase being that then when you need to make those changes, then you have to go back on a relatively structured approach. And the more ultra advanced, like the nirvana state in my mind, is you can do all those things and it's not quite effortless, but it's like you just decide and do without really having to. There's no weighing and measuring. There's no like what I was describing to that client. We were talking about it because he had just went on a vacation, somewhat of a vacation, kind of a celebration. And his son was going off to college, and he was asking, like, do you advise people when they do that to stay on the? We were doing visual food diary, and we weren't quite weighing and measuring, but had some targets that we were trying to aim for that we would monitor with the VFD. Somehow or another, we got to talking about, well, for a week, no. For a season, like the holiday season, yeah, you probably want to have some guardrails on. But ultimately, what we want to get to, I don't want to be nutrition coaching this person forever, but I want to get to a point where in the nirvana state, they have enough awareness to know what feels good, those things you were talking about in their training or the fit test. They know how to modulate their day-to-day nutrition to support what feels good, and without judgment are able to make those changes up or down or left or right, however they want to go, without having to do a bunch of scientific lever pulling. They just change what they eat, the way they eat, to support the habits and the behavior in a way that feels good. Like that to me is the nirvana state.
Yeah. And like you said, you're able to just put it into practice right then. Yeah.
Yep. It's like, oh, well, this doesn't feel good for the next X period of time. I know that if I cut or if I, add X or cut Y, it's not always a restriction, right? Sometimes it needs to be like, man, I know that I feel a lot better, sleep a lot better if I eat more green food.
Right. That's a big one.
And just dial that up.
Yeah.
Or,
like, where are you getting your calories from? Maybe there's a way that you can get foods that actually make you feel good, even if it's just like almost like a 1-for-1 calorie exchange.
Right. Yeah. Like, I know that when I feel this way, I need to look for ways to add in more lean protein and pull back a little bit of added fats.
Yeah.
Take one slice of bacon out and I add in a couple of more handfuls of chicken on my dinner plate or something,
Yeah. That's cool. I think what we just talked about was like things that are sustainable in a certain way, or like things that you can do where you don't feel lost. So it's like, is this a behavior that you can do for the long term, or a series of behaviors?
But what in your mind makes something sustainable versus unsustainable?
It would be unsustainable would be not enough, not the right fuel, amount of, or quality of that support your long-term vision for yourself. For example, you can't be in a deficit forever because you will
die,
wither away. At some point, it goes from eating a little bit less to not eating.
If you've never eaten,
scientifically die. Being sustainable means you can make a little bit up, a little bit down, a little bit up, a little down, but it's always kind of supporting where you want to be going and how you want to be feeling. Unsustainable would be like kind of making a change and never feeling good about it. You're just always doing something that is just choosing more suffering. And it's not the trade-off that you want. So, and you can't always be adding 5 pounds to your bar or to your body. There's also a limit for that. So there are health constraints, and then there are like quality of life constraints, in my opinion.
I kind of like my definition, actually. If you do this forever, will you die? Well, I guess the answer is always yes. But will you die faster?
Yeah.
There you go. Is this going to increase or decrease my lifespan or my quality of lifespan? Maybe that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it.
And then even sustainable, financially, are you spending so much on weird foods that it doesn't work? Are you
supplements?
Yeah, supplements stuff like that may not work for a long time.
There was a period of time where I got really into supplement optimization, and it was
what does that look like?
It was becoming one of the major budget line items in the monthly review. This was pre-YNAB, but I just remember, next to food and rent and car payment, it was like...
What kind of supplements are we talking about?
Oh, I mean, this was way back when it was BCAAs and, I'm trying to even remember, there were so many. Glutamine...
Glucosamine.
Yeah, oh man, yeah. Then fish oils, fish D3, general purpose multivitamin, when it was like Animal Pack or whatever. That one wasn't super pricey. The whey protein would add up quite a bit. There were a bunch of other ones that I remember getting into, but it
seems like the new supplement wave are like saunas and cold plunges.
True. Granted, I just had a client tell me they implemented a dry sauna into their routine and doubled their deep sleep percentage. Which, there's a fair amount of evidence, and it's been talked about, that the real benefit of sauna might be just improving your sleep quality.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Well, we'll see. But yeah, cold plunge, dry sauna, those things seem to be the new hot equivalent of BCAAs, although BCAAs have been pretty soundly rejected at this point.
Yeah. Spent a lot of money on those too. Awesome. Any other indicators you would want to put on the nutrition dashboard?
Well, sleep might be an interesting one.
Oh, right. When I'm not eating enough, I do not sleep well.
I would also put, if I'm eating too much, I don't sleep well.
Yeah, especially right before bedtime.
Yes, definitely notice that. If I have a huge dinner, it definitely changes my heart rate and changes my deep sleep dramatically.
Yeah.
So that can be a really interesting feedback mechanism for sure. Hard one because there's so many variables.
Yeah.
But there are some things that you can notice there.
Yeah. So this is all quite subjective, but that's kind of where nutrition at some realm comes from, is you want to feel a certain way. So I think, in my opinion, reasonable to have these kind of subjective indicators in addition to the more objective ones like waist and weight.
That, and I also, as a homework assignment for that client, asked him to think of one or two objective, concrete metrics that he could track on a day-to-day basis that were really behavior pattern or behavior measures, whether it's number of alcoholic drinks or added sugar.
How much water you're drinking.
Glasses of water, steps. Yeah. There are some behavior-based metrics that I think can be sort of a proxy for nutrition habits or body composition habits. I actually work with Brittany Snyder, our director of nutrition, and she's got 5 or 6 metrics that we track on a daily basis that are along those lines. And they're not necessarily measurements of is it working, but they're measurements of behaviors that will make it work.
Yeah.
That we know if we track those over a long enough period of time and it's within a certain band that the results will follow. They're sort of leading indicators, if you will.
And you have total control over those, which feels good.
Yes. Yeah. And what I like about those too is tend not to make those zero. So they're not elimination metrics, which often diets, quote unquote.
How many glasses of wine did you not have today?
Right. A lot of diets are, the definition of the diet is that you don't eat X, Y, or Z. And so I think that having some metrics around things you do, and they could be good things like steps, or they could be things that you don't want to do too much of, like drinks. I think also, nutrition has such a influence from social scenarios or your environment that having some leeway to be able to do things in a social environment without having to be, I kept talking about this with that client, like you don't want to have to be that guy that's like, oh, I'm on a diet, sorry guys, we can't go to ice cream at the famous ice cream place that we all just drove across country to do. I'm on a diet, like you just don't want to be that person. That's got to be a rough life. We love you, I love you.
Yes.
And I empathize that it must be a difficult life.
Yeah, that's probably a tough one. Well, thank you, Andrew. Thanks for those thoughtful parameters. And if you have any more questions about nutrition, or if you want some more education, we do have a lot of articles and even, I think, an ebook or two on our website at barbelllogic.com. You can even ask us questions on an experience call. We'd love to chat with you about that. That's what the call is for. You basically get one of our ears for like 45 minutes. So I encourage you to take advantage of that. And that's barbelllogic.com/experience. We will see you here next week. Thanks for listening.